Hello, I'm Aleena.
Hello, I'm Janine.
We're two sisters, two PhDs, relentlessly curious about too many things.
This is Sister Doctor Squared.
Hi everyone, welcome to episode 7 of Sister Doctor Squared. I'm Aleena and Janine is here with me. How are you, Janine?
I'm good. Hello, listeners. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are recording this episode and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging.
Thanks, Janine. And well, this is an exciting episode because we've had another listener request. And this request was actually to cover some of Janine's research on bowerbirds. So that's what we're doing.
Yes. I mean, let's face it, it didn't take much convincing from me. I'm pretty excited to get into it. And as listeners will soon learn, Aleena was quite involved in helping with a lot of my field research when I was doing this work.
Many stories. I'm excited too. This is really fascinating stuff. So let's get into it, Janine. Maybe you can start by just introduce us to the satin bowerbird. What are they all about?
Okay, so satin bowerbirds are part of this family known as the bowerbirds. Now, there are 20 different species in this family. I was working on this one called the satin bowerbird, which is found in Eastern Australia. Now, what is so cool about bowerbirds is that the males build these structures called bowers, hence the name bowerbirds. You would be forgiven for thinking they're a nest. They look kind of like a nest and they're on the ground, but they are not nests. What they are areas that the male builds that then become the focus for courtship and mating. In the satin bowerbird, they first create this little, what we call a platform, which is made of sticks and leaves, and they put that on the ground like this little circular platform. Then they build these two parallel walls that come up from this platform. And so one on the left, one on the right, and it's just big enough for a female to sort of sit in there if she was to be observing the male give a courtship dance. But it doesn't end there. So the males build this stick bower structure, and that one that I've described is known as an avenue bower. Other bowerbirds build different types of bowers, which we're going to get into a bit later. But what's also really cool is that in satin bowerbirds, the males then go on to collect what we call decorations. And they will collect in satin bowerbirds lots of blue items and some yellow and white items. And I will read you a list of the kinds of things that they collect, which is straight from my paper. Are you ready for this?
This is why some people might refer to someone they know as a bowerbird if they're fond of collecting things. This is where it comes from.
That's right.
So what do they collect, Janine?
Okay, are you ready? Here. This is verbatim from my paper. Feathers, particularly feathers of the crimson rosella, plastic bottle tops, plastic bottle rings, plastic straws, pens, pen lids, packing tape, other tape, flagging tape, electrical tape, pegs with springs, pegs without springs, small plastic UHT containers, ribbons, wire, miscellaneous soft plastic, for example, chocolate wrappers and condom wrappers. Condom wrappers were observed.
Yes.
Miscellaneous hard plastic, for example, containers or parts of containers, bones, including small bird and possum skulls, and vertebrae bones from other animals. And another thing that they can collect is sometimes little bits of other flowers and things. But those decorations tend to be replaced sort of every day or two. So they're really transient. They're getting replaced quickly. So the ones that we can easily follow are those more permanent structures that I've just listed.
The pegs is what I find quite funny, although I will admit I'd completely forgotten about the condom wrapper. That's clearly the most funny item. But the pegs I do find funny because you just imagine these bowerbirds flying into people's backyards and stealing their blue pegs. And so if you've ever lost inexplicably blue pegs from your clothesline, they could be bowerbirds in your area.
Yes, and I can tell you a story. When we were doing this research, someone was in the car park near the area where the bowerbirds were found and was frantically running around going, I've lost my keys. And we went, have you thought of checking the nearby bower?
Really?
So, yeah, we went down and yep, the keys were in there and they had a blue key ring on them.
Oh, that is hilarious.
I know.
Wow.
And do you remember there was also a little plastic blue toy gun on one of the bowers?
I do now. Yeah, you've reminded me of that. It is a little bit sad that so much of what they collect is plastic waste.
I know. And we have found that the closer the bowers are in relation to human populations, the more of that sort of stuff is on there.
Of course.
If you go to a more rural area, they'd have less. It will be mainly flowers, feathers, bones, that sort of thing.
So, Janine, why blue things?
Okay, so good question. So for satin bowerbirds, their favourite is blue, and as I said, a little bit of white and yellow. One of the ideas around why is that the male satin bowerbirds are actually blue themselves, whereas females are like greenish brown. So one hypothesis is that it's like an extension of their plumage. So rather than, developing this really elaborate, crazy plumage, which you do see in things like birds of paradise, that they've evolved this way of extending it off their body.
Okay, so they're quite vain.
Some of those birds of paradise can have such elaborate feather kind of patterns and structures that it does impede their flying ability.
Right.
So this could be a way to extend the display without having any compromise in terms of being more susceptible to predation.
It makes sense because if you've ever seen a male satin bowerbird, they are beautiful.
Oh,
they are stunning.
They're absolutely gorgeous. And they've got purple eyeballs.
They are really lovely to look at.
Yes. And another hypothesis is that the colour that they're choosing to collect and display is usually a colour that is rare for that species in the environment it lives.
Okay.
So when you think about it, blue is actually quite a rare colour in nature. There's not all that many flowers that are blue.
No, one is forced to collect keys and condom wrappers instead.
That's right, exactly. So it's when we're going to get into this, it's a way of showing if a male is able to obtain these sorts of things, he's doing well, and that's a very important signal to a female who's trying to choose.
I think we're going to get into this a little bit more shortly.
We are. So the males are collecting all this blue stuff in terms of the satin bowerbird, and then what happens in the mating season is that females will come down to a nearby perch near the bower and have a really good look at it. They'll spend a little bit of time checking out this display. And if they like what they see, they will go down and sit inside those walls of the avenue of the bower. And then the male will go on to do this really elaborate courtship dance, which is just hilarious. Go onto YouTube, find some videos.
We'll put links up to that. Absolutely, we will.
It's kind of like a wind-up robot doll. There's a lot of mechanical movements, and
you became quite good at doing your male satin bowerbird courtship dance impersonation.
Should I do the noise?
I won't ask you to do it. No, not on the podcast.
I'll do it. It's sort of like a. So go and watch. Go and watch some of those videos. Go and enjoy yourselves. And the other thing that's really cool is that as part of the courtship, towards the end, they will do mimicry of other bird calls.
That's right.
There's so many aspects going on in what these birds are doing. The behaviour is just out of control. And, you can imagine me, this budding little undergraduate science student, as soon as I was exposed to them on a field trip, I just became quite obsessed with them. And I was like, why are they doing this? What is going on? It's just so bizarre and interesting.
It is.
So, yeah, and I'm still feel the same way about them now. Yeah, so the other thing that's interesting is that the males, when they're juveniles, will still have the green plumage. It's quite similar to the females. So you need to have a bit of experience to be able to tell apart females from juveniles. And it's only when they're around 7 years old that their plumage starts to turn to the blue and they're ready to actually have their own display. And other studies have shown for that 7 years, they kind of hang out in little gangs with other young male birds, and they create these little practice bowers and they practice their dances, and will be going around and observing other males in the population, and adult males may come in and just trash their bower. So it's a very interesting system. It takes quite a long time for a male bowerbird to learn the tricks of the trade and be ready to have his own fully fledged display. Mm-hmm. So I've just alluded to there that there is an ugly side, Aleena. There is an ugly side to these birds, and that is The males are not simply just going out to the environment and finding the blue items.
No.
A lot, if not the majority of items on their bowers, they have stolen from other nearby males' bowers.
Yes.
And that is what I was really interested in when I did my research. And another part of this ugly aspect is that the males will also go down to a rival male's bower if he is not at home and just trash it. They stomp on it, kick it, rip out the sticks with their beak.
And you witnessed plenty of that, didn't you?
I did. And it was quite upsetting, to be honest, because you got to know these birds and you would see them maintaining their bower and they're so fastidious about how they do it. And they're always sitting there straightening up this bit and fixing up that bit. And then they go off on a flight. They're probably going off to steal from someone else, mind you. But while they're off, another male arrives and, you're watching thinking, hang on, is that them or is another one? And then you just see them start completely trashing it. Like, okay, no, that's not the owner of the bower. That's a rival male.
So it's mixed emotions as you're watching one male having success, but knowing that that's probably at the detriment of another.
That's right. So, yes, it's a fascinating system. And if you're someone that's interested in evolution, you're obviously going to be asking, how did this evolve? What is going on?
That's right. And so the males themselves, they don't stick around for caregiving when it comes to having young. So their only contribution is their sperm.
That's right.
Which means that the female's choice of mate is all about the quality of his genes.
That's right. So yes, it's important to point out that, as I said, the bower is not a nest. It's just this thing the males create to attract a female, mate with a female, and then the female will go off and create a nest by herself and raise the young by herself.
Right. And of course, the better the bower, the more mating success these bowerbirds generally have.
Yes.
And the bower quality is indicated by the number and type of decorations.
Yes.
And I know that another of your papers showed that some of the most sought after decorations were blue bottle tops, which you mentioned before, and also rosella tail feathers. Why, Janine?
Well, what we were able to find out, and this has been found a few times, the tail feathers pops up in a few studies. That is clearly a popular item, and it's also one of the natural items. So that would have been part of this system for a very long time. But in my study, we also found this connection with the blue bottle top. So we're talking like the bottle top on the top of a milk carton, that sort of thing. So what I was able to do is bring back items to the lab. I brought back things that had been stolen at least 3 times. And then I had a group of things that were from a bower but had never, ever been stolen. So once a male had it on its bower, it just stayed on that bower. So when we were comparing these two groups, what I did find was that the frequently stolen ones had 2 important properties. They were darker blue in colour, and we think that's because it's giving more contrast between that stick platform and those decorations. So if a female comes down and is having a look, it's just more obvious where the decorations are and how many that the male has. And then when we look specifically at the bottle tops and the feathers, those items reflected significantly more UV than the other items that weren't as frequently stolen.
Right.
Yes, so there seems to be some UV light signalling going on too. They're using that as a way to potentially demonstrate their prowess at collecting decorations.
And this visual display is particularly striking for these birds.
That's right.
Okay.
And we can't see the UV light, obviously, but when we can use special tools to measure it, we can see it. And the birds can see the UV light.
They can see it. And so it's all about what makes for the best visual display.
Yes.
Okay, so that takes us nicely into the study I'm going to look at, which is one of your studies, Janine,
yes,
of course. So thanks for the introduction into the bowerbird. And now I'm going to cover your study. So this is quite unconventional, but I'm looking forward to it. And let's see how we go. So,
and I will point out when you are incorrect.
This is a good test for me. So this paper was by yourself, along with your colleagues James Nichols and Anne Golderson of the University of Queensland in Australia. We know that better bowers with better visual displays attract more females. But the question in this paper of yours is the capacity to steal decorations from other males a true indication of male quality or genetic superiority?
Yeah.
Which you refer to as an honest signal. which we talked about in the last episode on crying. So basically a true indication of some underlying genetic dominance. Yep, or higher quality. Because alternatively, certain males might just end up with better bowers simply due to maybe luck, and then their dominance in the local area or cluster just